to have a conversation with my long-time great colleague, a partner, and also a mentor, Professor Lоуренсом Франклин. Professor Lоуренсом Франклин has been teaching negotiations over many years, but prior to teaching, Lэрри has been involved in negotiating. So my first question will be, Lэрri, tell me, over so many years, you have done over 300 deals, and you've attracted around 8 billion capital. So what has been the smartest deal that you've ever done?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lэрri Franklin. I'm an American. I was raised in California, but I've been living here in Asia since 1981, 44 years ago. So I have had a fair amount of experience in Asia. 25 years in the financial sector, both commercial banking, investment banking, and then running a VC fund. And the last 20 years I've been teaching, focused on teaching. So I've given some thought to this question, and my answer may be a little bit odd. I happen to have worked for larger corporations, so a large bank in America, American International Group, which is a very large insurance company, and finally Hutchison Whampoa, Mr. Li Ka-shing, richest man in Hong Kong. They say that Hutchison Whampoa is the largest corporate in Asia, not a bank. So these are large corporations. And as you may have experienced as well, one of the issues is this. In any corporation, there's a risk manager, either a credit officer or risk manager. And I'm sorry to say, but their inclination is the answer is no, unless there's a compelling reason to do the deal. So how do you deal with this? You know you're going to be blocked at the lower levels. Let me say it differently. The credit manager, risk manager, they can handle and approve an apple or an orange. But if you bring them a pineapple or some unusual fruit, they've never seen one before. They're not even really interested in looking at the merits of the deal. It's not an apple, it's not an orange, it's outside our normal approval process. The answer is no. Many of the deals that I have done successfully happen to have been unusual deals. Something case of first impression, or with a standard deal but with a little twist. A long-dated currency swap, 20-year Thai baht, Japanese yen currency swap, that sort of thing. And so my solution in all of these is, if you know you're going to be blocked at the lower levels, you have to go high enough. You have to start high enough with somebody that's at least willing to listen to you explain the merits of a pineapple.
That's right.
And if you can get that senior person to say, we should do this, it's in our interest to do this, even though we would normally not do it, and have that person direct the lower levels to say yes, then you have your deal done. The good news for the lower levels is they don't have to take the responsibility if the deal fails. The senior person has advised them to say yes. He'll take or she'll take the responsibility. So at least in the large corporations that I have dealt with, the solution to doing an unusual deal, good for the corporation, but unusual, is to go as high as you can to begin with. Does that annoy the people at the lower levels? You always risk their resentment. But your objective is to get the deal done, and ideally, because it relieves them of responsibility, they may be able to see the merit of that deal.
That's quite amazing. And you've been doing deals all over Southeast Asia.
Correct.
You've been doing deals on mainland China. You've been doing deals in Hong Kong. And as we know, in this cultural area, there is a phenomenon which is called guanxi. And it's very famous here. We all know what it is, but for our audience, this might be something new. Guanxi is a very special sort of relations through which a lot of business deals are being done here in Asia. So my next question would be to you like this. You've been in this for so many years, and now we are in 2025. Are guanxi still there? Are those relations still there? And what has changed over the years, both in corporations, in governments, but probably also social, in a wider social respect?
Very good question. So, 关系, which some people define as relationship, I define as reciprocal relationship. Now, we have the same concept in English. One hand washes the other. I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back. So we have the same concept. Now, in my experience, and yours may be different, in my banking experience in particular, Western banker, all of the things being equal, I'm competing with a Citibank or a HSBC or one of the others, all of the things being equal, price, amount, et cetera, in the Western sense, in my experience, 3 times out of 10, relationship will matter, will tip the balance. Now we get to China. In my experience, and others may disagree, 7 times out of 10, more than twice as much, relationship will be a significant factor in the weighting. My Chinese students would say, Larry, you're underestimating. It's 10 times out of 10 or 11 times out of 10. So let me bring this back to business. I say to my clients, my foreign clients, your serious competition is not the other foreign competitor. Your serious competition is the local competitor, even if that local competitor has a less valuable product or service. The chemical plant doesn't work as well. The local competitor may have an inferior product, but has the relationship. And I've got a string of examples to show how, in fact, China decides and weighs heavily the relationship. So that would be my answer. 3 times out of 10 in the West, 7 times out of 10 in China.
So guanxi can both help to create, but they can also ruin the deals. And we've both heard of top managers, of owners of businesses, looking through deals. And even if a deal was structured in a perfect way, and it was very promising, the person, the top person, the Laoban, the Lindao, would look at it and say, oh, this is that family, we're not dealing with them, we're not working with them. And then guanxi would be the deal breaker. Is that?
Well, that's a good point. And I make this in my courses. I worked for a company called Hutchison Whampoa, very Chinese company, Hong Kong Chinese company. They, as you may be in the news, they're in the news about all the ports. They run dozens of ports around the world, including 2 on either end of the Panama Canal. So in my experience with them, we always did the Western due diligence, very careful, thoughtful data collection, checking in bank records, et cetera, all the Western due diligence, DD, that you would do. But the last step always was, at the senior management level, do we like the people? Do we have a positive relationship with the people? And occasionally our 3 months of due diligence was stopped because the management decided they didn't want to pursue something with that particular family.
This is quite amazing. This is quite.
So another indication of relationship. Finally, one more point related to this. As you may know, Hong Kong has just, with great fanfare, opened a new mediation center.
Right.
Not arbitration, not litigation, but mediation. Now, mediation by definition is parties come together and talk. The mediator fashions a solution, and the parties can agree or not agree. It could be binding, but typically is non-binding. Unlike arbitration, where you have a legally trained person, the arbitrator makes a decision and it is enforceable. Why did China open the mediation center with great fanfare in Hong Kong? This is to help solve disputes along the Belt and Road. Kazakhstan, Venezuela, Pakistan, all these countries, where there's some dispute about whatever the Chinese promised or whatever the local government promised. What does mediation mean, really? See, going to court or going to arbitration tends to break the relationship. It says, our relationship is so weak, we can't solve it on our own. We need a third party to help solve it. What is mediation? Mediation is, in the Confucian principle, attempted to bring harmony between the parties and not have a third party. Third party can make suggestions, but not legally determine the outcome. That's between the 2 parties, bringing the harmony. Whereas arbitration litigation can tend to break the relationship.
Oh, this is amazing. a few months ago, I read a book which was written by a Chinese intellectual, and it was written about, there was a passage about negotiations and a conflict that had to be somehow negotiated. And the author, he was appalled by the idea that that could be decided by a court ruling, because the society was so much focused on maintaining social harmony, which meant that almost all conflicts had to be solved before people go to court. So that was so important.
Perfect.
And you mentioned government, and I thought that you've been doing deals at least under 3 prime ministers of China, which brings us to a very interesting but also crucial topic of negotiations and doing deals with China,
Right.
and that's government. Can you talk a little bit about the role of government in deals, in business dealing in China?
So I've thought about this question. Here's the way I would frame it. There are really 3 power centers in China. There's the civilian government, mayors of cities, governors of provinces, ministries in Beijing. That's the one we see. That's the one we're familiar with. That's in the press. There's what I call a shadow government. What my Chinese friends say, no, it's not a shadow, it's the real government, which is the Communist Party. And at all levels, in your factory, there's a Communist Party representative who in fact has the power to stop production if he or she feels like it. You may have experienced that as well. So the mayor has, right, there's somebody who's the city Communist Party secretary, and then the governor and so forth. That's the second layer. In many cases, a deal does not get done by the civilian government. It gets done with the cooperation, with the approval of the civilian government and the Communist Party secretary. And I have some clear examples of that. Finally, the third power center, which most of us don't see or don't recognize, is the military. If you do a deal along the coast of China anywhere, the Navy is often involved because it may relate to some aspect of the sea or the coast that they have jurisdiction over. If you do a joint venture with a company inland, right, making ball bearings, making microscopes, whatever it might be, it may look like a civilian organization, but in fact it's either funded by the military or the military buys a good chunk of its production. So the Army gets involved in approving your deal. Right. So 3 power centers, one should not ignore any of them.
Thank you, Larry. Switching the gears a little bit, there's a question about preparations and negotiations. And I've recently been thinking about writing a book. And you know, my latest idea of what would I like to dedicate my work writing a book about negotiation would probably be preparations. Because this is one of the most neglected part of any negotiation process. Because it is in preparations that we're not only rehearsing, we're not only getting facts, but we are also creating important setup for everything that would happen later. So my question to you, and I'm sure our audience would be very interested to learn about that, is how do you prepare for negotiations? And also, specifically, there's one interesting point which concerns stakeholder mapping and stakeholder management. So what's your attitude and what are your best practices in this area?
So do you want to focus primarily on China with respect to preparation or more broadly?
We're talking mostly about China, but this particular question, I think it goes far beyond Chinese negotiations only. And our audience, these are people who are doing negotiations all over the world. They do negotiations in Russia. And I think preparation is something that it is really difficult to find a proper place where you learn about that.
Right. So, as you know from your negotiation course, all the literature, preparation, we're pretty good usually about understanding our strengths, what it is we want out of the deal. A weaker area for many of us is anticipating what the other side wants and then trying to figure out where the commonality is. What's the feasible region, if you like? Okay, and what we used to do in the bank and the venture capital area is we would have somebody prepare the other side, and we would have a mock negotiation, for example, and the other person raising different, and we hadn't thought about that, anticipating what might come up. The other general comment I'd make, and maybe this is many times you go into a negotiation and you're a team. It's not just you, you're a team.
That's right.
And the challenge of the team is each of the units, you may have finance, marketing, and some other, each of the units may have a different objective for that unit. So actually, before you have the negotiation with the other party, you need to have a negotiation internally.
That's right.
What are our corporate goals? And our corporate goals may not be the same as the individual unit's goals at all. What are the priorities? Who is going to speak? Who's going to lead the negotiation? And let me bring this down to a real example. Both Trump #1, meaning the 2016 Trump, when there was a 2.5-year period to negotiate with China, and today, most recently, as you may know, America sent 3 people, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, and the U.S. Trade Representative, right? Each of those units may have a different goal. For example, the Commerce Secretary is trying to promote exports to China, wants China to open its market. That's different than the Treasury Secretary, who's trying to balance there's a $350 billion annual trade deficit between America and China. The Secretary for the Treasury may be trying to balance the trade aspect, right? And the third person, which is the U.S. Trade Representative, may have some other goal in mind. Who's going to take the lead? These may be somewhat inconsistent. Do we focus on the trade deficit? Do we focus on opening up China's markets? Those are 2 completely different objectives. So what I say to you, and it's happened so many times to me in China, I often get, for the senior level, for the larger deals, I would be the country manager. So I'm already pretty senior, but there'd be somebody flying in, and this person would, frankly, disrupt the deal. I've learned I have to sit down and we have to negotiate among ourselves first. So when you talk about stakeholders, I'm really thinking about internally and getting it set up and not letting those other people interrupt or take over the negotiation. That to me is the biggest challenge in these larger corporations,
of course,
which is where I've done my business.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. Let us now jump to what happens when we are negotiating down the table.
Yes.
And this is the part that I think many people like. This is the part that is most vivid, perhaps. And this is the part that you see in movies most often. Something that is happening when we're all sitting down the table and we are interacting and we are negotiating and we are trying to win the best part of it for us. Now, my question would be that being American, negotiating with Chinese, negotiating internally with Americans, you've been on the both sides of this table. So my question would be like, what tactics have you been observing most often being used by Chinese negotiators and by American negotiators? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So here are a few tiny little examples, but they recur again and again. So I want to make sure you're aware of it. And I'll focus on China, if I may. Number 1 is the Chinese government officials are always very prompt. If it's an 8 o'clock meeting, they are there at 8 o'clock. If they keep you waiting outside the ministry, outside the door, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it's a tactic.
Okay.
Be prepared for it. Plan for it. Don't be upset by it. Okay? They're trying to say, we're in charge. You're the small potatoes. I have power over you. That's one. Secondly, you go into the negotiating room. I've had this happen several times. It's freezing cold. You've got to put your coat on, you've got your gloves on. It's freezing cold. I assume they want to try to speed up the negotiation. Plan for it. Wear long underwear. Plan for it. It's a tactic, but don't fall for it. The very first question you will hear within the first 5 minutes, again and again, when did you arrive? How was your flight? And the key question is, and when are you planning to leave? They want to know your time frame. Is it 1 day? Is it 3 days? Is it a week? So that they can strategize and optimize their negotiating style. And how many times have they said to me on that last day, Mr. Franklin, you don't want to go home empty-handed. And let's negotiate in the car on the way to the airport. You got to sign something, otherwise your people will be disappointed. So my cute little tactic for this, I'm not recommending it, but this is what I actually used to do. I would make 2 reservations home, one for Friday and one for Saturday. So we get to Friday at 3 o'clock. Oh, Mr. Franklin, you have to go to the airport. Please sign before. You know, this is so important. I'm going to cancel my reservation. I'm going to stay 1 more day. Completely upset the Chinese. Baffled the Chinese. And it's very difficult for them to cope with that because they had planned everything down to the last. Okay. Now, the next thing is when you go into these negotiations, there may 2, 3, or 4 of you, say 3 of you, and there are 30 people on the other side. All right. There are lots of people. And you think to yourself, quite correctly, what are they all here for? So how do you find that out? They're not going to volunteer it. So on my side, I always begin. I introduce myself and I introduce my team. Here's so-and-so, here's his title, right? And we hand out the business cards. And then we say to the other side, the Chinese side, now please introduce yourselves. So we get the business cards, we get some idea about what the title is and what the role is. And then at the end of that first negotiation, we always take a picture. They want a picture, we take a picture. Yeah. And we spend the evening trying to figure out who's the decision maker or who are the decision makers. Okay. Why is this person in the room? Mm-hmm. Are the decision makers in the room or are they hiding behind the curtain? You try to figure out basically how China is playing this. Oh, by the way, once they have your time frame, what will be very useful, I can't always achieve this, is to figure out what the Chinese time frame is. Because that will give you some indication is if you have a 3-day time frame, but they have a 3-week time frame, you can make a deal in 3 days, but you'll have to give up a lot. You need to have the 3 weeks before they begin to seriously. So I'm amused by the Americans thinking they're going to have a breakthrough negotiation. The Chinese are going to drag this out 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, all this tariff stuff. It'll be another 2 years before everything's settled. That's my opinion.
This is
we'll
fantastic. See. Yeah, of course, of course. We are talking about tactics and persuasion tactics, right? Yeah. And your reactions and how you recognize them and how you prepare for them. And I want to jump to the next question, which is, we both teach that negotiations is both science, but also a skill. Yeah. Which everybody can learn and everybody can improve. But my question would be as follows. Have you ever met super talented, naturally super talented negotiators who possess a so-called skill which is called reality distortion field? Have you ever seen that? Or have you ever seen anything close to that? People who are so persuasive, so powerful with the way they present themselves and they try to talk you into things that it is really very difficult to resist.
Well, in many negotiations, of course, you have your position, the other side has this position, you try to come together. In the investment banking business, I found it very interesting because you stand in the middle. Right. A company needs something. They want to raise money. Either they want to raise an investor, equity investment, they want to raise debt, bonds, or loans or whatever. And then you've got the other side, which are the banks and the equity investors. You stand in the middle and you've got to bring them together. You're right. So it's actually 2 negotiations, and the key is to, get them, and of course they have different views, and to try to say, well, give me a little bit more flexibility. I'm trying to close the deal for you, and you try to fit them together, and it's really quite. I have seen some people who are just brilliant at this. Now, I do think some people are better at it just naturally than others. Right. But I do think good negotiating skills can be learned. Now, in the literature, you will see that there are normally 5 styles of negotiation, okay. Right? People are identified as accommodating, compromising, collaborating, et cetera, right? My style tends to be toward competing. We all have different pieces of styles, but my style tends to be competing. So Every negotiation is different. Your particular style may work in some contexts and not work at all in others.
You're right.
We've seen Donald Trump, who's highly competing, like a Musk highly competing. You can imagine these two people will either love each other or they'll hate each other over time. So it really depends upon the context. Some people are better at. It's like negotiating with your children. You may be brilliant at that and not very good at work, or you may be very good at work and not very good with your kids. So I do think all of us can get better. We learn about our style, and we learn what our strengths are, and we learn what our areas for improvement are. And that's where we have to work hard. So let me give you an example. In my competing style, I know what I want. I plan what I want. I know what I want. I tend to push forward very hard. I try to remember satisfactory outcome. I get what I want. And I have to remember satisfying process, which means the other party thinks that they had a good negotiation.
Okay.
Because if I squeeze them, right? I squeeze them and they agree to the outcome, but they're not happy. They will find a way to get me back.
That's right. If you take every piece of value from the table and you leave the other person with nothing, that might be felt unfair.
Yeah.
And fairness is an important word because, the fairness which has been neglected, it can give birth to anything, to any extremes. People get mad, people get frustrated, people become your enemies, and this is not how you become a good negotiator long term.
If it's a one-off where you're selling something or buying something, you'll never see the person again. You're buying a used car, you're buying a house, whatever it might be. That's one style.
All right.
But if you're in a joint venture where you are going to be with this person, in bed with this person for the next X number of years, you really have to adopt a different style. I want to make two other small comments here that may be helpful. Those of you with competing styles like I have, one area where I work to improve is to listen. Because I think I've thought carefully about it, I think I know the right way to go. I maybe tend not to listen as well to others' opinions, and yet they can provide valuable input. So I have to stop and listen before. And the most important thing I have learned over 30 years in Asia, 40 years in Asia, is the use of silence. You state your proposal, you state your position, and you stop. You don't need to explain it further. You let the tension build. Now, I, for one, don't like the tension, right? I'm always tempted to jump in, and then that silence can be extremely valuable. And Asians are really good at silence.
Oh yeah, they are.
So that's something, at least from my point of view, you may not have that weakness, but I have had to learn. Hold my tongue. Just let the other side absorb what you've said and think about how they're going to.
It was really difficult for me to learn this technique, but then I told myself once that when you have to be silent and you open your mouth, you pay for each word that you produce. And that sometimes helps. You gave your final offer, the offer that you mean to be final, and then you have to stop and be silent for a while. That's difficult.
So that's sort of a major learning. Let me make one more comment. I'm thinking about the government idea. I want to give you one example, real example that may resonate with you. So Qingdao Brewery, the beer company, major exporter of Chinese beer to the world, went IPO, did an initial public offering, and many of the investment banks were interested to lead it because it was the very first PRC, a Chinese entity coming to the Hong Kong markets, so-called H-share issue. And finally, there were two competitors left, about 25, and then two finalists. One was Goldman Sachs, the worldwide leader in IPOs, and the other was Bank of China, the investment bank of Bank of China, that is a commercial bank and had never done an IPO, never led an IPO. So you can imagine who's going to win this, right? But at the end of the day, guess what? Bank of China won this. Over Goldman Sachs.
That's amazing.
And Goldman Sachs couldn't believe it. Well, who were the decision makers? The board of directors of Qingdao Brewery in the West would be the logical people to make the decision about hiring the investment bank. But they weren't the decision makers. Goldman Sachs spent a lot of time with them. The decision makers were two, the mayor of the city, because this entity was owned by the city. The mayor had appointed the board of directors.
Oh, right.
So you can wine and dine the directors, but it's the mayor who's going to decide. And
That's the word.
Communist Party Secretary of Qingdao City. Bank of China knew this immediately. They spent a lot of time with it. And they say, my friend at Bank of China says, that Goldman Sachs ignored the Communist Party Secretary, didn't even know he existed or was going to be important to the decision. So always try to figure out who are the decision makers,
Right.
and it may be quite different in China from what we know in the West.
And this is a stakeholder mapping and stakeholder management, which is so important.
And it's not always easy to find out because people will tend, as they do in America, tend to claim more authority. Oh, I'm the mayor and I can approve this, or I'm the governor and I can approve this. Try to find out who the real, decision
person
makers.
is.
Yeah.
All right. We're in the modern world, and a lot of things are happening around us. And you are teaching some of the brightest people in the world coming to study with HKUST and Kellogg program. And my question would be, like, what is your opinion, but also perhaps, you know, the opinions of your students, of these bright minds all around you. What do you think about the art of negotiation in artificial intelligence era? Is it going to outlive the era of smart, super smart, intelligent machines?
Okay. So AI, we're all wrestling with AI. I think AI has a beneficial presence in this sense. You give the AI the parameters of your deal, for example, and particularly if it's a multi-factor deal. There are 7 or 8 or 9 elements to negotiate. In any deal with a VC equity investment, it's not just the percentage ownership, the amount of money, percentage ownership, but it could be seats on the board of directors, it could be vesting of the, there are 8 or 9 issues. Okay. I have used AI in my classroom. My students have used AI. They're allowed to use AI to generate ideas, but their writing has to be their own individual writing.
Right.
And we can't tell the difference, at least today. Maybe AI will get better. It seems to me that this can be beneficial because it can generate ideas that you haven't thought of. For example, if you have a 9-issue deal, and more issues are better in negotiation, right? Because you can trade, right? You can make additional value. Sometimes an AI solution, they can see combinations. You can give up here, but you get this over here.
Okay.
They can see combinations that maybe you couldn't see or didn't see clearly.
Okay.
Now, if it's a one issue, you know, you're buying a house, you're selling a factory, one issue, maybe not so much, but you've got the issue of the factory, you've got the issue of the staff. Do you keep them? Do you turn them over? Other multi-issue, I think AI can be quite helpful. In my opinion, but maybe I'm an old-fashioned guy, I think the human element will never go away.
No.
Because there are some issues where you promise to do something or you give me assurances that will be done, where we can't create a mechanism of enforcement that's going to work. A simple example.
Right.
Let's suppose you're distributing my product in Russia.
Right.
And we agree that you'll pay me 2% royalty on everything. Right. And I rely on you to give me quarterly reports. We sold 10,000 pens and here's the money. Well, I don't know whether you sold 10,000 pens or 100,000 pens, right? I have to, now we can have some kind of enforcement mechanism with an auditor coming in, but basically you can still hide the books if you want to. I think AI is not going to replace the human element. At the end of the day, there's some elements where we have to take it on faith, and that's looking the other person in the eye and saying, I trust you to carry out what you said you would. But AI, as I say, can be useful, particularly in formulating the strategy, thinking through, I have 9 issues, what's really important to me, and what's important to the other person. Right. AI can also be helpful to figuring out what's the other person likely to want, and how do I put the pieces together.
And maybe to help you to understand what is their potential option or like what is their so-called BATNA or alternative, or is there a zone of potential agreement between the two of you? So these are all the things that are well structured, and if you provide AI with enough information and enough background, it might be very handy to structure it for you, to give you this structural understanding.
Let me give you an example. Let's suppose on the numbers, for that amount of money you're investing, you deserve a majority ownership, 51, 55, 60%. Right. You're going to tell the entrepreneur whose idea, whose baby this is, that you want to control. You want my 5 million, I want 60% of your company. I see. That would break the deal.
Absolutely.
So you have to think about, okay, I'm willing to take 49%, and I will try to control through the board, through vesting, through other ways, because anything more than 49, the other party is very unlikely to be willing to agree to give up owner control of the company, since it's his or her dream.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Larry. Well, the audience that will be watching us and listening us, these are people who are super dedicated to the idea of getting better in their negotiating skill, but also getting better as negotiating artists in the art of negotiation, because there's both. So what could you recommend? What kind of advice could you give to those people who are now trying to get better at this? To get better negotiators, to get better deal makers, to establish better relations, beneficial relations.
Yeah.
So what's your
that's a big question. So let me try to answer it this way. The classroom really is a very good place to practice and learn how to negotiate. And here's the reason. In the real world, you do a negotiation. You want to make a deal. You make a deal. Could you have made a better deal? There's really no way of knowing. That's right. In the classroom, party A gets, all the students get party A or party B. If it's a simple one-on-one, could be two-on-two or more. And you begin with the same facts and you negotiate, and then we see the outcomes. You have 20 outcomes. And you think you did a pretty good job. And then there are 3 or 4 people that got a better outcome from you. And so you say, well, gee, I thought I did pretty well. So the professor asks the question, how did you get this wonderful result, this better result? Somebody better than yourself. And we have it explained. Oh, I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought about approaching that way. In the same way, if you got a very poor result, then why did you get such a poor result? Well, I got annoyed with him because he wanted to take over my company, and I didn't agree with that. And that tainted the whole. Okay, so the next time we don't ask for 60% up front, we work. Right? So the learning opportunity by being able to compare your outcome to other outcomes, I think is quite powerful. Now, I've taught at Stanford, I've taught at negotiations, HKUST, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, HKUST, and some other places. And again, the improvement I see in the students from day one through to the end, these courses tend to be 28 contact hours. So we have a number of opportunities. They go through 11 or 12 negotiations, and after each we debrief and we see, you probably have a similar outcome. It's just been very, very helpful. Now, 2 themes I want to leave you with. These are just my themes. You may not have this. One I've already mentioned, which is satisfactory outcome. You get a desirable result. It may not be the best result, may not be the result you hoped for, but you got a result, right? Because you have to compromise. Satisfactory result or outcome and a satisfying process. That means the other party feels that like they got a good deal too. Now, I've had to learn this. I used to go for the goal. I used to want to be number 1. I used to want to get everything that I wanted. And I've learned that with a satisfying process, the deal is going to last. Second point. My mantra, developed over a number of years, is polite persistence wins the day. Polite because if you're rude about it, you keep asking, and you're rude about it, people will turn away from you. Persistence because many of us give up too easily. In everything we want to do, there are obstacles, and it's really easy to sort of stop and say, oh, that's too difficult. So in my view, polite persistence wins the day. If I can take the time to give one small example.
Sure.
This is a China example. It's a big one. So I used to work for AIG, American International Group, great big insurance company out of America. It used to be the 11th most valuable company in the world by market cap. Okay. AIG, originally called AIA, American International Assurance Company, started in China, in Shanghai, in 1919. They were here from 1919 to 1952. In 1952, with the People's Republic coming in 49, they nationalized all the insurance companies. AIG left. After 1979, the beginning of the open policy, China's open, we welcome foreign loans, we welcome foreign investment. AIG wanted to get back into China. China published insurance regulations that said we welcome foreign insurance companies to come back, but you have to do it in a joint venture. You have to have a Chinese partner. The head of AIG, Mr. Hank Greenberg, wanted to come back to China, wanted a wholly owned license. He told me this story himself. In the mid-1990s, he started coming to China twice a year. He would meet with several people, including the mayor of Shanghai and the insurance commissioner in Beijing. 7 years, 14 trips to China, and his message was always the same. We, AIA, would like to come and invest in China. You know, as an insurance company, we collect premiums, we reinvest longer term. But life insurance company, right? We have long-dated liabilities, we need long-dated assets. We're going to, invest in developing the country. 14 trips, 7 years. On the 14th trip, before Mr. Greenberg had a chance to stand up and tell the mayor of Shanghai again for the 14th time what he wanted, the mayor stood up and said, Mr. Greenberg, I know what you're going to say. The national regulations are clear. We have to do a joint venture. But for you, for AIA, we are prepared to give you, AIA, a wholly owned insurance license in defiance of the national regulations for the city of Shanghai. And because you're such a Lao Pangyo, old friend, we are going to not give this benefit to any other foreign insurance company for the next 2 years. You have a 2 years head start. 14 trips to China over 7 years. Polite persistence wins the day. And today, AIA, although the foreign insurance companies are still small relative to the Chinese insurance companies, AIA is the leading foreign insurance company. It had a 2 year head start.
Wow. My friends, this has been Professor Lawrence Franklin of HKUST and Stanford with us tonight. And I thank you for your time. But Lэрry, I thank you so much for thinking this over, for dedicating your time to this. And I hope to see you again and again and again.
My pleasure, Igor. Thank you.